name is Avra. Welcome to Different Angles. It's all about perspective.
That's right, and my name is Yuko. Today we will be sharing on different perspectives on the topic of boundaries. Now, before we begin, please take note that we do not give any medical advice or diagnosis. Our discussions today are purely based on our own thoughts as well as points of views from our respective learning and education.
Wow, Yuka, we've really got an interesting topic today, and it affects every single one of us. I think every person in this world has a problem with boundaries. Many people actually have the wrong idea about boundaries. They believe that they already have good boundaries, when really what they're actually portraying is a brick wall. Or they believe that boundaries are unkind. So they think if they say no or they don't allow something, it's unkind. So a healthy boundary is the essence of having a well-grounded, balanced space to exist in. How do we actually make that really possible? So without any other healthy boundaries, relationships just cannot thrive. They result in feelings of maybe being resentment, if you're having disappointment, or feeling of being disrespected. These feelings can also lead to a situation where there is a division between somebody else's feelings and your own, and then it becomes a violation where you are not being respected. So because so few of us actually understand what boundaries are, we rarely see evidence of them working. And I think this is a very important fact to bring to term. When you do put boundaries in place, and you find that people are reacting correctly and you are harmonious, then you can feel it, and it does wonders for your mental and relationship health, and also your rational health, where people become to know where they stand, they become to a situation where they can relate, they understand, and they know what you expect from them and what you're trying to allow.
I think you've mentioned very good pointers here, Avra, about violations and how boundaries violate some of our limits. Now, some of you may wonder, what does boundaries, or specifically, we talk about healthy boundaries. What does healthy boundaries actually look like? Now, boundaries are established only when we are able to sense our own needs and our own wants. So once you know what makes you feel safe, then only can you access your voice and then voice out and speak out these needs that you have, which expresses your comfort and the safety components to make sure that these things that are important to you, they are heard and they serve you best. So the easiest way to think about it, about boundaries is using the idea of limits. Now, we all have limits, right, Avra? You have a limit, I have a limit, we all have different levels of limit. Now, even though we all experience disrespect or violations of our own limits at times, I think the truth is that people generally do not try to violate your limits, but they might just be unaware of what your limits are.
Yes, because sometimes this is because we're not clear with ourselves. We ourselves don't know what our boundaries should be. And then other people, you're not knowing what they need, you're not knowing what you need or what you want. So you become almost like a people pleaser at times, sometimes too, because you just think, okay, let's not cause any trouble, let's not stir up any trouble, let's rather just be a people pleasers. But that is when burnout happens. And what does burnout really mean? It's a real or imagined line that marks the edge or the limit to something. It's when you are really just overstepping the boundaries. Yuka, it's quite important because these guidelines, rules, or limits that we put in place or create an identity to must be reasonable. They must be safe, and they must be something that's permissible. What's good for one person might not be good for another. So we have to behave towards each other in a respectful way to have a good boundary.
Actually, that's so right, Abra. I myself am very guilty of the issue of being a people pleaser. I think it happens a lot when I was much younger and, I didn't understand how to draw the lines and just wanted to make sure everyone around me was satisfied and happy. So in order to draw that imaginary line or probably a real line within us that you mentioned, here are 6 boundaries that we want to discuss today on how we can deserve to have the boundaries that we need that we can set against other people, and also what they might look like in practice. So the first boundary that we're going to talk about is physical boundaries. Now, physical boundaries includes our needs for personal space, your comfort with touch, or even your physical needs like rest, or if you need food or water, right? Your daily necessities. It is actually okay to let people know that, I don't want to be touched, or hey, give me some space. Like, I need some physical space, okay? So it is also okay to tell people that, maybe you're hungry, or if you're not hungry exactly, or that maybe you just need to get some rest. The truth is that it is actually okay and acceptable to say no without feeling guilty. I think a lot of us tend to feel like, oh, what if I say no? What if this person's not happy with me? Then maybe I don't say no and extend a little bit of myself. And that's when we, break that boundary level that we're supposed to set in place. Healthy physical boundaries then will look or sound something like, I'm not a big hugger. I'm a handshake person, so let's handshake. Or maybe I'm allergic to prawns, so we can't have that in our soup at home. Or maybe you want to tell somebody, it's okay, I don't appreciate you touching me like that. Because, I myself, I'm not a physical touch person. So I really don't fancy too much of hugs and touch and all. Or maybe you have your own personal room, right? And you don't want people to walk into your room without your permission, which is pretty natural. So you just want to tell somebody, hey, can you not go into my room without asking first? I'm setting the line over here. Okay? So whether is it receiving inappropriate or unwanted actions that deny your physical needs, such as being forced to push harder when you're tired, or maybe you're instructed to wait in order for food to come, or having someone that is, entering your personal space without permission. This, all these things could be physical boundary violations. Like Alfred that you mentioned, violations, right? They
Yeah.
vary on a spectrum from mild to severe. It could be a little bit of violation, it could be severe violation itself. But the most severe violation then, it results in serious physical abuse, or probably on the other spectrum itself is neglect.
Yes, and when you're saying that, it reminds me of the social distancing aspect of COVID. We've been put in a situation socially where we have to give each other space. We have to have this distance. In fact, recently in South Africa, that particular regulation has been withdrawn. So there is no more there's no more social distancing in South Africa. We still wear masks, which are a boundary, but the social distancing aspects are not. And some of us are less comfortable to come out and give a big hug when we see someone. And also we know how important physical touch is to make us feel good. It's a feel-good hormone, that serotonin and these kind of hormones that get released when we have touch. So that makes it very difficult as well. And when you're putting up a boundary, people find this very difficult. So you have to offer a gesture in order to stop someone coming in for that hug. So what I do is I put my elbow forward, or I do a fist bump forward. And I say, oh, I don't do the hugging.
And that's setting some physical boundaries right there. Like, yes. Okay, stay a meter away from me.
So you're physically actually putting up a wall. You're saying, don't touch me. And some people take offense to that. Now, we have to learn to respect that everybody has a different physical comfort zone. So the next area that I really want to talk about is emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are as important as any other boundaries. They are about respecting and honoring the feelings and especially the energy of somebody else. Do you understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the energy? The energy is the feeling that you're taking on when you walk into a room or you go to meet someone and they're looking incredibly sad. You know something's up. That's the energy that they're giving off. They're giving off a sad energy. So you wouldn't march off and say, oh, I had a wonderful day today and I jumped on the spring and I went for a wonderful swim or whatever. Your first reaction is probably going to be something sympathetic or empathetic because you're feeling an energy. And you're going to say, What's up? Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Or are you going to just sit back and allow that person to express the way their energy is allowing them to react? It's a reaction and a behavior. So setting emotional boundaries means recognizing emotional energy. You're able to be now capable of taking in and knowing when to share and when not to share, when it's an appropriate moment. And it's also on the other spectrum about limiting emotional sharing. We call that in our day and age filters. You know, that person that just can't shut up, that just says something totally inappropriate. So sharing with people who respond poorly is also an area that we have to look at for emotional boundaries. We have to respect emotional boundaries means validating the feeling of other people and making sure that you respect their ability to have an emotional and have some emotional information. So I can give you an example. You can say, if someone's really telling you a story that's bad or sad or difficult or heart-rendering, you could say, I'm so sorry you're having a rough time right now. I'm not in a place to take all this information in. So do you think we could come back to this conversation at another time? Because you're not prepared in that moment to actually have that conversation because you're having an emotional energy, you're having an emotional time. And when you share your feelings and then someone criticizes you, it makes you feel like you just want to shut down. That's another kind of energy. So you can only share if you're able to respond respectfully, and that is having a boundary. If you're having a hard time to talk, find out first if that person's in the right space to talk. Maybe there's that famous saying, sometimes people don't want to be fixed. They just need someone to talk to. Sometimes you don't have to give them advice. Maybe it isn't the right place. And it's important for you to understand that this is what becomes a healthy mind. Your emotional boundary violations could also be dismissing or criticizing somebody. It's okay to disagree with someone, but rather ask questions than point fingers. What is appropriate for this particular situation or relationship? So you're asking people to justify their feelings and you're reading through all their personal and emotional information in your head. And you're assuming you just know how other people feel. That's why you have to ask. That's why you also have to share. I'm feeling sad right now. I'm not ready to speak about it. I will talk to you when I'm ready. That stops the other person in their tracks. They don't know what to do.
It's really hard for one to actually express, that they are upset and they can't talk right now. But I think that action itself is very important to establish the line so that the other party, number one, doesn't take it personally. And also they would respect your boundaries that, okay, I'm not in the right state right now. So whatever that's going to come out is not going to be nice. It helps also to prepare the conversation to be on a more positive note when you're
Yeah.
able to come back to it.
I've got a lovely analogy about this particular situation. I imagine a boundary in relation to a garden or a space that is comfortable. So I say healthy boundaries are not meant to be walls, okay? They're meant to be gates. When you walk in the field and you see a gate and you can open that gate and you can walk through, or you can leave the gate closed and you don't need to walk through it. So I believe that boundaries allow us entrances to allow us to enjoy the beauty of the garden.
Right. So basically, you're in the garden, but there needs to be gates to make sure your garden is safe, right?
But not walls that stop you.
True, true that. But the gates need to have they're openable, so
Absolutely,
you can
because
see.
too many people utilize boundaries as a wall and not as a gate.
I agree. Completely agree on that. Emotional boundaries. I mean, just hearing about that itself helps me to realize that, it's so important to set that to not feel dismissed and to not feel criticized or allow myself to be dismissed or criticized for what I'm sharing.
So what do you think then about time boundaries with that regard?
Well, It's the same as emotional boundaries in the same kind of concept that we also face. Time boundaries, we all know, right? We need to set limits to emotions, people affecting our emotions. We also need to set limits to how people can affect our time, our usage of time, because time is money, and we all know money is time, right? So your time and my time is equally valuable as anyone else's time. It is really crucial, therefore, to protect how our time is then utilized. So I think setting that time boundaries, Avra, it's really incredibly important, especially in the various aspects of your life, such as work or home or in your social life, so that we don't overcommit by understanding our priorities and setting aside sufficient time for each one of these areas. So when we understand our priorities, like, okay, maybe to me, family is definitely more important than work. So when I know that I need to commit time for family, my work will not supersede the time I set aside for my family and my home. So when we understand our priorities, right, it is actually so much easier to healthily limit the amount of time that we give to other people. For example, in the new age of working, I have a job that, requires so much of my time and commitment. And sometimes it does eat up my weekends. And my weekends are supposed to be set aside for my family. So, there are days when I go to family gatherings and I realize that, hey, I just want to spend time with my family and work calls when work calls. And I'm always pushed to be at that point of state of time where I'm thinking, do I make the decision to go back to work, or do I make the decision to continue staying with my family? Which one do I commit to at the point of time? But my healthy boundary tells me that probably I would stay with my family and I can only commit to work for an hour. That's it. And then I'll go back to my family. So really giving yourself that the limit of time of which one do you want to commit to and how much do you commit to it. So healthy time boundaries can sound like, I would love to help. Maybe I could tell my colleague that. Maybe I would love to help. I would love to work on this. But I would be overcommitting myself. Is there another time that I can come back to it? How urgent is what you need me to do? I think that urgency is so important right now, especially when nowadays people think everything is urgent, right? Everyone's needs are always urgent. So which is exactly the most urgent thing? If I have family time on Sundays, I could let other people know in advance so they would know that this is what I'm committing to. For example, I can say like, we have family time. I have family time on Sundays, on the weekends, so I will not be able to make it for this gathering. I'm so sorry, but thank you for inviting me. Or if I'm a professional, then I definitely need to set that time boundary because I can be saying that, I'm really happy to help you, but hey, my hourly rate is. Because this person needs to respect that as a professional, I have time for personal usage and have time for professional usage, right? So it's if you're demanding a professional for time without paying them, if you keep them in conversations or any task that you want to achieve for a much longer time than you promised, or if you show up late to an appointment that you have with a professional or cancel appointments with them, then you are violating this time boundary, right? Perhaps one of the most biggest things is age of today's generation or today's working society, right, is that when we contact people, when they clearly state that they're not available. So if somebody tells you, I'm not going to be available on Friday, and Friday evening you call that person and say, hey, I just want to talk to you about something. I've got so many of these calls and it's just so hard to, can you imagine that person? Would that person be able to just hang up the phone? It would be so hard. But you're clearly violating their time boundaries. So I think right now, recognizing that there's so many factors that are taking our time away and that, making themselves urgent, more urgent than other needs, it's so important for us to set the time boundary and to also take time away to go back from into our personal space and spend some me time, some essential me time, self-care time, mask, self-pamper routine time, right? And reboot and refresh for the day.
Mm. But you see, Yuka, this is all very good in theory. Then you sit in an office situation, and how do you say no to your boss? How do you say, sorry, dude, I've got a birthday with my parents. I can't do this on Saturday. The way to do that is to have a commitment and a contract from the beginning, to have a clear understanding before you reach that point. So if you want to protect yourself and you want to have boundaries, boundaries are there to protect you, not to put up walls as we've discussed before, but to protect you from having burnout, from saying yes too much, from it helps you to say no without saying no. So if you say to your boss in your contract when you start your job, these are my hours. Sundays, I am unavailable. Saturdays, I can put in 2 hours. Weekends, I don't work. I work Monday to Friday from X time to X time. Should there be an exception to the rule, I am open to discuss this. So once you've then told your boss or your company in the guidelines to the rules, that's fine. Now what happens where you set those boundaries in place at the beginning of your work situation and the months go on, and as you're going along, you realize that those boundaries are being violated. You're now expecting to be worked on a Saturday, on a Sunday. You're going, who is the person that's responsible for allowing those boundaries to overshadow you? You are, because you made a contract.
Yeah, I think it's so important to set that expectation at the start of the contract agreement so we both know we're on the same page, right? You and your boss knowing what to expect out of you and what that you're doing out of goodwill, right? Out of like additional effort that you're making. That is actually very true. To say no in a virtual context, so hard. Probably one of the best ways is, if there's a virtual meeting, just don't turn up for it in a virtual meeting.
And
that would be.
And you can be called out for non-attendance.
That is true. That is very true. So it really depends also on the leadership management itself, how they handle that culture.
And
Well,
it's up
I
to
mean,
you. Yeah, and you can lodge a complaint. You can say, this meeting was called without my knowledge, or this meeting was called out of my contractual hours. Nobody contacted me to ask me if it was suitable.
Legally, I am actually not obligated to attend the meeting, but I will do it out of work obligations or out of due respect for work, perhaps.
There's nothing wrong with that. The problem comes is when you allow it to happen too often.
Right. Yes, that's right. So it cannot be a regular occasion where is expected of you to actually do that all the time. That is so true, though.
Well, we'll come back to virtual work a little bit later because there's another boundary that I really want to discuss right now, and that's sexual boundaries. And this is and this happens online as well, but it's mainly in the physical form within relationships and within an office environment. It can also happen. So healthy sexual boundaries are about consent, agreement, respect, understanding of preferences, desires, and particularly privacy. So if you want to go through all those things, it's what discuss with your partner what pleases you. Request, for instance, that you would prefer if a person uses protection for sex. Discuss whether you're going to use contraception. We all get all embarrassed about these, or some of us, I don't, but some people do, get embarrassed about these particular questions. But saying no to things that you don't like or that may potentially hurt you physically or emotionally are protecting you and the privacy of the other person. So you could say, when someone says, do you want to have sex? You could say, no, I'm happy to have sex. Is this comfortable for me or for you? You need to express what you like, what you don't like, what offends you, what doesn't offend you. If someone says, do you want to have sex? You can say, no, I just want to cuddle instead. Is that something that would make you feel comfortable? Are you unhappy with that? It's back to open communication. Okay, and those are all things that are revolving around sexual feelings of intimacy. Okay, but we also have sexual intimacy in other situations, and that can be when you are asking somebody a question that is direct from a sexual point of view, and they end up either sulking, punishing you, getting angry, And if someone doesn't want to have sex, an unwanted touch, even as far as assault and rape, the person actually gets cross. They don't respect that boundary. So you have to ask for consent. You must have no pressure to engage in unwanted acts of sexual or physical activities. Unwanted sexual comments and leering are one of the most offensive things, especially when you don't know someone intimately. It can be taken as being an incredible pushing a boundary. It's inappropriate for your boss, for example, to be leering or making sexual comments to you, or telling dirty jokes that are not acceptable or inappropriate. And we don't all have to be the person who is high and mighty. We just have to respect that some people are more sensitive. You would not speak like that to a married woman. It's ethically and morally not accepted. Another thing that is also a problem is lying about using contraceptives and lying about your past sexual and health history. So if you're aware of things that could affect your relationship from a physical point of view, you need to share that.
That is very interesting point of view that you mentioned, that actually lying and not giving the truth, it's a violation of boundaries. So in a sense, when we're not rendering the truth itself, we are violating the other person's boundary that they're setting against us.
Yeah, and that could lead to something like what we call an intellectual boundary.
That's right. I think that's also challenging that person's idea. That's why. So if you don't give the truth, then the other person will have a different idea. And therefore, intellectual boundaries, in that sense, refers to our thoughts and ideas in a sense of curiosity. So, like what you mentioned yourself, we have to respect other people's ideas and what they say, and what they comment, and not dismiss or belittle their thoughts or curiosity. So having the basic respect, right, and the willingness to understand what's the other person's needs, what do they prefer, what do they want at this point of time, would be the most important of all. That's why I think when we set intellectual boundaries, we also have to look at things from all different forms of perspectives, right? Not just our own perspective,
Yeah.
or also from the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
And therefore, healthy intellectual boundaries would probably look like when you are disagreeing or when in a conflict with somebody, right? We all know in conflicts, it's very hard for us to care for the other person's perspective because we want ourselves to be heard. But you need to set the line and say, I know that we disagree. Avra, you and I, we may disagree, but hey, I will not let you belittle me or criticize me like that. Or if you want to talk about it, but at that point of time, you know your emotional boundary is reaching and you want to set that level of intellectual boundary. So you want to say, I prefer to talk about it perhaps later on. I would love to talk about this more, but perhaps it's not a very good idea to talk about this over dinner. So let's do it later on. Or you can win-win. You agree to disagree. So which means you can say that I respect that we have different opinions over this. You are right, I am right, both are validated. So does this mean though that you have to accept all the thoughts and opinions? If you are right and I'm right means everybody has to be accepted? Well, the truth is, it might not be. That's right. It's actually very important to learn to recognize the difference between healthy and unhealthy discourse. For example, if someone actually shares an opinion that is inherently really harmful or disrespectful towards others, for example, if they have thoughts of racism, if they talk bad about another gender, if they actually have homophobia, example, right? So if you have this kind of very strongly extreme thoughts itself, then you have every right to set that kind of boundary to not let their thoughts affect you. In such cases, letting that person know that you do not tolerate this kind of talk, or you can distance yourself from them, or possibly you could cut them off, right? If the in the far extreme, if it gets too much, this could be a good choice in order to kind of protect you, right? Like Avra, you mentioned, it's not about setting up walls against people, but it's helping you to protect yourself as well as to grow
Yes.
yourself to perform better. Now,
Yes.
you do not have to have intellectual discourse with someone who violates you or people who tend to violate your thoughts itself. So you have the right to actually say, no, I would not like to entertain such thoughts.
Exactly. And, it's not just that. The part of this that really screams at me is the part of assumptions. Because if you sit in a situation where you are not verbalizing and not sharing and not respectful of what other people's emotional and physical and all these things fall under intellectual boundaries. So if your boundaries are to have an intellectual difference with somebody, some of us think differently to others, not necessarily just because we think differently, but because of our backgrounds, our past, our influences, our mindsets. What's left is what I call an assumption. Now you've left it wide open, and that's when the danger starts to happen, because you haven't indicated how you would handle something or what you're capable of doing intellectually. And someone's maybe expecting too much of you. They're assuming that you've got it, but you haven't.
That's actually a form of judgment by itself.
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Labeling somebody and pre-assuming that this is how you behave, this is how you think, this is how you talk.
Well, that would move us on to material boundaries. I love this one. I love this one because material boundaries refer to the items and possessions like your home, your car, your clothing, your jewelry, your furniture, and even, of course, your money. It's healthy to understand that you can and cannot share what you choose to share and how you expect your items and materials to be treated by people that you share them with in a work environment, in a home environment. It makes no difference. But if you have limits on how your material items are treated, that's healthy. And that will also stop resentment over time. You keep borrowing those brown shoes and look what they look like already. Have you actually bothered to even realize how many times you've borrowed them? Maybe you should just keep them as your own.
That's something that, I tend to hear my younger sister telling me a lot of times. Hey, stop using my clothes,
Yeah. And that causes conflict. But it's because there was no set agenda. It wasn't like, you can borrow my clothes. Please, I'd ask you to be respectful to looking after them. And if something happens to them, for example, I've lent something to someone who was a smoker. And I got it back with a burn hole at the bottom. It wasn't an enormous hole, but that's not how I gave it to the person. And I'm quite sure that person didn't take a cigarette and stick it through the garment. I'm sure it was an accident. But there was no reference when it was returned to, I'm so sorry, but unfortunately I burnt this. Can I replace it? Is it okay with you? Could I have it mended? I apologize. And what about the person that borrows your goods, no matter what it is, and never returns them?
I think it's due basic respect for that person to account to you in terms of what material they've borrowed and how they return it in terms of the condition, and to make any kinds of recovery suggestions if it's not up to standard.
What happens if you say no? You can't use my car.
Then you have to respect that person's boundaries because that's their preference.
However, in good communication, what about I pay for insurance if I drive your car? Would that be okay?
Yep, that is basically that really depends on what the person's concern is, you. So if he's lending you the car and he's concerned about the insurance, then you've answered the call.
I'm sorry, even if you do get insurance, I'm still not comfortable with you lending my car. Accept it. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Because the more we set boundaries, the more we recognize them. Okay? But we also don't want them to become too many. You don't want to have too many boundaries where there's so much that you are and aren't allowed to do that you don't know which way to turn, and you're walking on eggshells around someone all the time. That's why I love this one of emotional boundaries, because it taps into people's emotional feelings here. And they can be even violated absolutely destroyed or stolen in very many cases. So it can be used to manipulate, to control a relationship. And that comes about often when we talk about money. And that's why I'm saying sometimes you need more boundaries than you realize, because the setting of the boundaries helps people to show up for us and also to become better at us showing up for them. No, I cannot continue to lend you money. You need to pay back what you owe me first. So, in the words of Brené Brown, clear is kind. What you say is what you mean, and what you mean is what you say.
That's right. So be clear in what you actually tell the other person so that the other party would actually understand what your expectation is.
Don't want a what if, but you said.
That's right. Especially this, I think it's especially important when we are doing a remote working situations nowadays, when we don't meet in person, face to face. So we don't see the physical behaviors that we have, and it's very easy to misunderstand or to not actually understand the other person's boundaries. So in terms of this remote working environment, then Afra, what do you think are how do we set some healthy boundaries?
The first one, without any doubt, is to identify your priorities. Know what is
Mm,
important and
mm,
learn how to say no.
mm. Especially to bosses, yeah, and
And your
clients.
colleagues, and your colleagues.
Mm, mm,
You've got to establish boundaries with your co-workers.
mm. That's right. And I think by establishing that boundaries, by saying no to work, it's easy when you actually learn to take time off,
Yeah.
right? You learn to tell them, I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to go for lunch. I'm actually going to take a break right now. So you really communicate clearly that these are your professional level boundaries. Like, I need some time off so I can perform better at work later.
And you've got to do that even if you're only working with one person. You've got to resume and assume remote working, even if it's only just with one other person.
Especially when you're communicating, as long as you're communicating with someone else
Yeah.
that is not you,
Yeah,
of course.
and have respect where you mute your notification and you silence those unnecessary noises that come in. And also another thing that helps with boundaries when you're in the workspace is to have a dedicated workspace. It doesn't help working where your dogs are barking, where your children are laughing, where your husband's trying to work, where there's music playing. That actually is disrespectful. And
Mhm.
even the space you're working in, I don't want to see somebody's unmade bed in the background.
Yep. And I think communicating your preferences, if that person, is working in a way that is not your preferred way or it is affecting you, communicating it both verbally as well as in written form to
Yeah,
ensure that there's clarity. This is so important
yeah.
because a lot of us tend to just say, right? We thought that, okay, I said it, you should get it. But sometimes we might not be audio learners, or we might not just get it as what you mentioned it. I think it's good to both say it and also write it to that person to let them know.
So you're reaffirming whatever was said in the meeting. It's like a summary. That was in the old days when we used to have minutes. It's exactly the same thing.
To make sure everyone's on the same page.
And also ask for input. Ask what needs there. An assessment of needs for everybody, not just for you. What works for everybody. And keep the meetings to office hours and a specific period of time. I'm watching people work remotely, that are working in a meeting for 5 hours. That's crazy.
Yeah. I've been through a 4-hour meeting, and halfway through, you're totally checked out
You're
from the
done.
meeting.
Yeah. You have to have regular breaks.
Yeah.
And you also have to maybe decide, does this require 4 hours?
Yeah. So many good pointers here for people who are actually remote working. What is a important message that we want to leave them with then?
Oh, as you know, I always have a message. We have to remember that setting boundaries will come with consequences. And I think that's something that we didn't cover in this particular discussion. And that's why I'm putting it in now, because When we make decisions, we have consequences, and we have to know how to deal with this. We always have to give others and ourselves the ability to understand with absolute clarity what it is that we're needing in order to function with respect and balance to lead a less stressful life. So remember, boundaries are not meant to be walls. They're meant to be gates that allow us entrances so we can enjoy our gardens. And most importantly, boundaries are a vital tool of survival so that others know where we stand and we know where others stand.
That's right. I'm so looking forward to the beautiful garden that I'm going to be in with the gates around me that can open and close for people to come in and out at different times. As you can see, the gardens atmosphere is coming up. So thank you for all of you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe and also check out the description below to receive your message for the day. Remember, set your boundaries.
Absolutely. So I would say that's a wrap for today. Always remember that boundaries are set, and the people that don't like them are often the people that need them. See you soon. Have great fun. Love and light.
Peace out.